the vertical farms are totally gone belly up. The plant-based meats aren't doing that well. And most of the rest of what they're offering is like digital agriculture, robotics, and or, digital information system where they're just sucking up farmers' data and giving it back to farmers. So that's probably going to persist, but it's still not clear what problems it solves.
Right.
Like, what do the farmers need the data for if they can go and walk their fields? Well, if they're big enough, they maybe need the data, but
because they can't walk their fields.
Because they can't walk their fields, but it's really not clear what kind of problems it's solving. So I think that's the main thing with that. I mean, it's also a mismatch of what Silicon Valley can offer and what the needs are, because agriculture and food, as we know, are fundamentally biological and biophysical, include the soil, and they're offering a bunch of digital solutions. It's like, well, what farmers, at best they need better treatments to substitute for toxic chemicals. If you want to get rid of toxicity in agriculture, okay, come up with a biological product. I'm not saying that's the best way, but they could be going that direction, right? But they don't. It's just digital.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock, all raised on well-managed pasture, without synthetic fertilizers or toxic chemicals. You just heard from Julie Guthman, a professor of sociology at UC Santa Cruz and a well-known food systems author who has taken deep dives into topics ranging from strawberry production, obesity, and most recently, Silicon Valley's entrance into agriculture, from hydroponics and vertical farms to lab-grown meat. In this conversation, Julie and Dave explore the problems and solutions that organic certification brings, as well as what it will take to not just incentivize good agriculture, but also disincentivize the practices that are harming us all. So let's get into it.
So welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm talking today to Julie Guthman. Julie, I just interviewed Austin Frerick. I don't know if you ever read his book, Barons, but it's a really good book about food monopolies. And he said something about you. I said, I'm going to interview you shortly. And he said, oh, she's my academic heartthrob. I just love her work. So, good. So tell me a little bit about your work. I'm going to let you introduce yourself just a little bit.
Sure. So, I've been a professor at UC Santa Cruz for 21 years. I just retired in December, which
Congratulations.
It's great time to retire. Thanks. And so if I look over the course of my research career, it's generally been about various efforts to transform how food and agriculture are done. Or how food is produced. And so, that ranged from my earlier dissertation project, which I completed at UC Berkeley on organics, to my most recent work on Silicon Valley's foray into food and agriculture, which has kind of gone on with the assumption that they can do it better than everybody else has.
Yes. Yeah. No, and I want to actually talk about both and some of the points in between.
There's a lot in between too.
Yeah. When you started, you actually did have some background as an eater who cared about food and cared about organic, I think, is that right? You kind of came from a family tradition.
No, my father was a health food freak from way back when, the health food freak.
Yeah, that's what they called them,
the terminology. And it was actually tough living with him. And he, I grew up with when health food was pretty nasty.
Yeah.
Like, I had to have carob chip, whole wheat honey cookies. And got ice cream once a year if I was lucky, and so really the food, the good food then was not tasty. So it was a struggle. When I go to friends' houses and really go for the junk food big time.
Yeah.
But anyways, I did come from that. When I went back to get a PhD, it was really my third career. I didn't expect to be a researcher, and I really didn't. I had no idea I would fall into this kind of career trajectory at all.
Right, right.
Yeah.
In an earlier life, I think you told me that you used to help organize the eco-farm conferences. Did I get that right?
No, I've attended them. I never
Attended. You
Yeah.
weren't doing the back behind the scenes work?
I was sat on the eco-farm board for a while, but I was never an organizer of the conference.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think eco-farm board counts for what I had in mind.
Yeah.
So you came from that tradition, which
Yeah.
I think eco-farm is
Yeah.
kind of an amazing
It
event.
is. Yeah.
That was before you started the studies as
Oh, no.
You were already a PhD at that point?
Yeah. No, my background, I was an accountant for a while. I was a community organizer for a while. And so I got into studying food and agriculture, not really at all related to my background from growing up, but honestly, it was it was from a seminar that I took in graduate school. We had to do a group project studying some sort of global commodity chain, because this time when there was a lot of academic work on the restructuring of the food system. Like the growth of soy and all these big commodities. And we, in my group, we said, well, what if we do something like on salad mix or something in California? And my professor, who was my advisor, was very excited about that. And so we were three of us, and we just kind of started off like checking out. We had kind of some hypotheses about what was going on that proved to be kind of true, which was that there was agribusiness was kind of taking over a lot of organics.
Yeah.
And so we went, within a few weeks, we talked to some of the new organic supermarkets, and we talked to several growers, and we talked to several distributors, and we just learned a lot very quickly, and also learned that this whole area had been under-researched by social scientists. So I still thought I was going to do a dissertation on something else, and my advisor was like, "Are you nuts? You have this project right before you." And so that's what I ended up doing my dissertation research on. So that was really the beginning of it. I mean, yes, yes, I was an eater. So before that, I had been going. It was the 1980s. The Bay Area restaurant scene was really booming, and so I had been going to good restaurants and eating like Alice Waters' restaurant and Stars in San Francisco, and eating the great salad mix. So that's kind of what got me interested. But I did not expect to do anything like being a scholar of food and agriculture. It just kind of fell into my lap.
Okay, so you were really, right from the beginning, you were studying this bifurcation in the organic world.
Yeah.
And one side was what we might call the movement, and the other side is what we might call the industry or the business.
Correct.
And they were already pulling apart to some degree, or it started with the movement.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think like the term bifurcation is a term I used early on, or the conventionalization of organic is a term that became associated with me. But I think, I was seeing that. In my research, and I spoke to, I think, 150 growers at the time. There was not a lot of research done, so it was easy to get in the door with people.
Yeah.
And so, I did, and I purposely sampled growers who had moved from conventional into organics, or were conventional growers dabbling in organics. And then, I did talk to several people who had been organic from the get-go, including some of the people we would, associated with the organic food movement, like the people at Full Belly Farms, for example. The kind of usual suspects, or Jim Cochran at Swantonberry Farms. But I really wanted to understand these, how and why conventional growers were moving into organics, and that became the major focus.
Yeah. So what was your experience of those people coming in from conventional agriculture? I mean, can I say that I know many people who started there and became true organic champions, but I also know many for whom it's just, I just interviewed a friend of mine who's a hydroponic producer, and he never buys organic because he thinks it's a scam. But he grows a lot of organic well as a lot of conventional because he said the market demands it, so I do it.
Yeah, no, that's the gamut that I ran. I mean, there were some people who had started conventional who were completely convinced by organic ideals, and who had moved as much acreage as possible to that, and some who were just dabbling in it when the market was right for them and would go in and out of organics and find acreage to do it on. Some were, I mean, you know, some of the rationales were really interesting. Like some growers said, well, I was really worried that they were going to have my favorite pesticide taken away from me in the regulatory scheme, so I wanted to figure out how I was going to do it without that. And I think that's a really important point that I keep on coming back to in my work today, which is like, if growers are worried about having regulations that are going to change the way they're going to grow things, they're going to experiment with more agroecological methods. So the main reasons people were going into it is because they became, you know, they saw the light, or that they were worried about pesticide regulation, or a buyer had asked them to.
Right.
A lot was that. Like I talked to a bunch of people, no one really talks about this whole region, but I talked to a bunch of people in San Diego County who live inland and had like 2 or 3 or 4 acres of avocado or citrus groves. It was like residential real estate with groves. They didn't care at all about agriculture. They were retirees. And there was a buyer there that was going around saying, hey, well, you know, grow organically or don't use anything and we'll buy this stuff from you. So there were a few hundred growers of that sort. They had no interest in agriculture whatsoever. You know, so there was like, I purposely did my work in California in different regions to kind of understand what was the regional dynamics, but also it kind of interfaced with what I understood to be the histories of those regions. And this was an area, San Diego County was once, you know, orange groves and avocado grove, or more citrus groves. And, you know, then this area was like, you know, retired aeronautics people.
So, as somebody from the Northeast
Yeah.
who started coming to California
Yeah.
really to talk about these questions.
Yeah.
And I don't know when it was, but I started coming to Eco Farm and actually giving talks and visiting farms. And I have gotten a bit of an education. I mean, California is this amazing place where there's a lot of what I would call real organic, but there's a lot of what I would call industrial organic. I mean, it's the home of industrial fruit and vegetables.
Sure is.
Yeah. So could you tell me from your perspective, how would you define industrial organic? What does that mean?
I would say industrial organic would be growing organic according to like the least common denominator of what you can get away with in terms of the regulations, but continuing to monocrop on maybe not necessarily large acreage. I mean, I think we need to be really careful when we talk about what a large farm is, because a large wheat farm, let's say, is several thousand, not tens of thousands of acres, right?
Yeah, large ones, 10, 20,000, yeah.
Yeah, a large lettuce operation, maybe only a few hundred, but lettuce is so high value. I mean, I have another project we could talk about if you want on strawberries, which are extraordinarily high value.
Yes.
It's like, I think these days it's probably $100,000 an acre investment, right? So if you look at value of crops sold, large takes on a very different dimension than acreage.
Yes.
I digress there, but so industrial, so I'm less concerned about the size.
It's not necessarily about the size.
But the kind of mode of like using, you know, barely following the regulations, more monocrop oriented. I mean, the labor relations really vary. I mean, I don't think, I've seen very poor labor relations on organic farms. So it's not really about the labor. I think it's more about the commitment to agroecological methods or not.
Okay, we're going to talk about agroecology in just a minute. But so I have a friend I met, a grower out here, a mid-scale grower, I would say, and he's split. He has half of his farm is organic and half is conventional.
Yeah.
And in his heart, I believe he's an organic farmer, but the market and then works out for him that he does both. And he told me that his son went to one of the UC schools, I don't remember which one, and studied agriculture, and the organic class was entirely about what can you substitute that's allowed for what you would like to use that's prohibited.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that's not organic farming. That's
the input substitution.
That's right.
That's the other way I would define the industrial model, is more the input substitution. And some of those, I know we'll talk about the regulation of organic a little bit, but some of them fought really hard to have some of the substances that are questionable for, as you well know, that are questionable as organic as included so they could be called organic.
Could you give me an example of a substance that was fought for and won?
It's been so long since I've
you don't
thought
have
about
to.
that. It's been a really long time since I thought about that. But it wasn't like, I don't remember. The nitrates, right?
Yeah, they have a lot of hydrolyzed soy and a lot of hydrolyzed products that are as potent as a chemical fertilizer, and if you don't dilute them enough, they'll burn the roots off your plant. Very popular in hydroponics now. So it's not in your mind, what makes something industrial organic isn't necessarily a question of scale. It is about a mindset of how people approach it. But is it also
it's a practice.
It's a practice.
I mean, the mindset, people have various motives. I think it's a practice. I mean, I think, can you have a diversified farming system on large acre tracts? I don't know. There's some limits to that, but I don't think, I just don't think size is a very good indicator, precisely because the crops differ so much in how you grow them.
Yeah.
So it's the monocropping and the input substitution.
Right.
And the soil methods that aren't, paying attention to replenishing the soil, obviously.
Right. I know that, say in baby greens, for example, and I think strawberries is another example of these very intensive, very high value crops. And man, they work that soil. I mean, they're just turning them over so tightly that all of the problems of conventional agriculture start to show up.
Absolutely.
And grow. To me, it's interesting that what creates these problems to a large degree is the marketplace, the economics of what land is worth, what you're having to pay for rent if you don't own it, what the marketplace is demanding, and of course price. And one of the things that you've talked about a lot is how good we've gotten at making food really inexpensive. At the cash register.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of these industrial methods are extremely efficient. We use efficiency. I mean, people see efficiency as a value. It's not a good value, right? They're extremely efficient, and the prices are really cheap.
What do you mean by efficient there?
Like the most, the highest yield for the lowest resources. I mean, we talk about efficiency as if that's the greatest good, and it's. I don't think it is at all, because it's not sustainable.
Okay, so let's go a little deeper there. One of the things that I've had this conversation with myself and with other people, and I go, but every farmer I know is interested in efficiency. Of course, because they're trying to figure out how to make a living, but they're doing it in a very different context.
Right.
So what is the context where efficiency, the kind of efficiency you're talking about, becomes what dominates your decision making? What are you leaving out of that? What are the things that are hidden from that?
The long-term ability of the soil and the surrounds to be self-replicating. But it's also a focus on yield. Like, and this is something I really struggle with, because I've been in some projects with agricultural scientists And it's really hard to communicate what social scientists have been arguing for a very long time, that producing more does not help farmers, nor does it help food security. So agricultural scientists are so wedded to the idea that we need to produce as much as possible. And farmers think that too. And this really came up in my work on strawberries. I was really pushing farmers and saying, why do you want to find the most high yielding varietal if it's not flavorful, or what else is going on? They say, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will do it. So there's this kind of treadmill effect that growers feel like if they don't, or collective action problem, if they don't produce as much as possible, they'll go out of business, which is true because somebody down the road is producing as much as possible and the markets adjust to that. And then the farmer who's like, trying to produce differently loses out. But overall, so you have farmers saying, well, I need to produce as much as possible, and then they'll complain about really low prices. And they complain about really low prices because markets are constantly flooded with too much supply. So it doesn't work. And this is the argument I have with agricultural scientists. It's like, it doesn't actually make sense to produce this way. So what if you lose a little crop and do it with fewer pesticides or no pesticides, right?
Yeah. It seems to be a treadmill that nobody knows how to get off of, though.
Yeah, well, it's a collective action problem.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been attempts in history to try to have orderly marketing so you don't always flood the market. But it's really difficult because farming is, very individualized, and farmers want to do what's best for their operation and aren't thinking about the collective much.
Yeah. I think the Canadians have come up with some solutions around milk.
Yeah.
And they're better at controlling production in order not to create a glut in the marketplace. I don't think Americans have done that in North America.
There was milk marketing orders in the past. And,
yes.
Yeah. And there's been marketing orders around, other crops. But, yeah.
We have not quite done, but I just wanted to say one of the interesting developments is in the organic world, there are obvious examples of monopoly now.
Yeah.
Driscoll's, by their own claim, are over 70% of the organic berry market.
Yeah.
Grimway and Bolthouse are over 80% of the carrot market.
Yeah.
I think this isn't a good thing.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. So why isn't it a good thing?
Well, because if someone controls the market, they can ultimately control prices and they control what farmers can do. I mean, Driscoll's is a great operation because Driscoll's growers, and Driscoll's has lots of different arrangements with their growers. There's some people are growing by an affiliate company of Driscoll's, and some are independent growers that sell to Driscoll's, but they have to use Driscoll's packaging. They have to use Driscoll's varieties that are proprietary. They have to, Driscoll's doesn't necessarily say how exactly they can grow, but once you specify the variety and the price, you're kind of locked into a whole lot of other things. So it doesn't give much freedom to do otherwise. And of course, it when you have proprietary varieties, it's a privatization of this important thing we call the seed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the term chickenization?
I've not heard that term.
Yeah, it's what happens in the poultry industry, both meat and eggs, and which I think maybe 4 companies own 90% of the production.
Yeah.
And they have created a relationship.
The contract farming.
I
know the relation. I've never heard the term chickenization.
Yeah, chickenized. If you've been chickenized,
and,
I think Driscoll's is a more benevolent chickenization than the actual chickenized.
Absolutely. No, the chickens, those growers, chicken growers who are contract farmers have absolutely no freedom. They are told exactly what to do. And what's happening there is the companies, probably Tyson, Tyson, is controlling all the pieces of production but not taking any of the risk. So the farmers take the risk. So all the kind of biological risk that happens from getting the eggs and growing them out and having the chickens get diseases, the farmer takes that, and the growers get, the shipper gets all the consolidator
benefits,
gets all
yeah.
the benefits. And so
Right.
it's just a really bad deal for farmers.
Growers take on labor too, so you
Yeah,
know the relationship with labor,
Yeah.
what's paid, that's up to them.
Yeah. So
the-
I mean, that's the
yeah.
classic model. I mean, I think Driscoll's is a mixed bag. They're more benevolent in some areas and not in others.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you know, chickens are really different than strawberries in terms of what kind of control you can have. I mean, Driscoll's will say, well, we'll let our growers do whatever they want as long as they use our shipping containers and our varietals, but they also have very specific quality standards, and so growers are taught. Like, I think when I was talking to people, strawberry growers, like, they were tossing maybe 30%, culling 30% of their strawberries, as opposed to like the 10% that those growers that were working for Giant were, because of Driscoll's very specific quality standards. And we know that quality in this case means size and color and shape, not
taste.
Not taste.
Yeah. I think that the Driscoll berries used to taste better.
Yeah, I don't think they're very good.
You know, they've become pretty cardboardy, but
Yeah. It's the raspberries that are like really do nothing for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to go into strawberries a bit more, but before we do, a couple things. One is, you've talked about, I would say, the failure of industrial organic to address the needs that organic was trying to address.
Yeah.
What are the needs that organic was trying to address that industrial organic doesn't?
To farm in a more long-term ecological way that doesn't extract and that replenishes soil and the area around it. I mean, I think I want to be cautious. I mean, this is really old research, so I think about it differently than I used to, but I want to be cautious because I think, and I hope we can talk about organic regulation. I think that, farming industrial organic is better than farming industrial non-organic, I mean, if we're using fewer pesticides and fewer synthetic fertilizers, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing.
That's a step.
It's a really important thing.
Step.
Yeah, and if farmers if that's what allows people farming to, or more farms to use fewer toxic inputs, that's a good thing. And so I don't think like holding up an agroecological ideal, even though that's my aesthetic preference, I don't know that that's the right kind of way to think about what the goal is. It's so I've always been kind of on the fence there, even though I know what I prefer.
Yes. I think we're all confused about that because we all agree that an industrial organic product is better than a chemical.
Absolutely.
Industrial chemical product.
Yeah.
However, it's also not what I think of as organic.
No.
So I think that the question is, we seem to have a failure of imagination around terminology there.
Yeah. But I also think it really has to do with the choice that the organic movement made in terms of regulation. And that's what been like the key thing I've been talking about for 25 years now, or 30, whatever it is. Is that, I understand why at the time that organic farmers first started dreaming up having a certification system, they didn't really believe they could stop chemical agriculture in any other way. And so they come up with this voluntary labeling system where, we know the stories that at first, the first standards for organic, you could write on half a piece of paper that you can't use this, you can't use that, and when you see it, and it became this hugely elaborate system of regulation. And so there's been lots of critiques made. I'm sure you've interviewed all the people about how the regulations fall short in terms of what they allow and don't allow. And that's a really important story. But the part of the story that doesn't get enough attention is how the system of regulation itself kind of created a barrier to widespread proliferation of organic techniques. And the reason is because organic proved to be a lucrative market, particularly in the beginning, and you had these conventional growers coming into it, and then the organic movement people reacted to that by saying, well, we need stronger standards. We need to uphold our standards, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, what they were essentially doing is saying, we want to limit the market so we can, by having the standard, rather than saying, how can we encourage more people to grow this way? And because the standard itself is like, first of all, it only works if the incentive is to encourage organic by a higher price premium, which is what the label was doing. It only works if you keep that price premium high, and that price premium only stays high if you limit who can grow organically. And so that's what was motivating a lot of people to come into organics. They want the price premium, and the movement organic growers are saying, okay, sure, but we want to have these high standards, but we're also trying to limit the market to keep our prices high. So it's a system of regulation that is discouraging movement into less toxic techniques. And am I making sense here?
You are. I have a few things to say, but go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, and it's like, this I kind of rethought this again when I was working on alternative proteins, which are trying to substitute for conventional livestock. Yeah. I think alternative proteins are most of them are ridiculous, but I think conventional livestock production is horrific. Mm-hmm. And so, but what you see the alternative protein producers saying is like, well, we don't think we can change industrial livestock, so we're going to create an alternative in the form of these fake, plant-based meats or cellular meats or fermented proteins that are going to seem like meat someday. But those alternatives actually are not marketable, or they're not economic, because conventional production is so damn cheap. And so rather than saying, let's figure out a way to regulate conventional agriculture, which not only we should regulate anyway because it's done so horrifically, but that would make alternative proteins more marketable, more economic. So they're not doing that. They're saying we're just creating an alternative. And that's exactly what happened with organic. It's like, rather than trying to think about how to undermine the worst sort of conventional production, which would make it more expensive if you have to meet higher regulations of conventional, they said, no, let's create an alternative.
So instead of saying we need to reform the farming practices of what we call conventional,
right?
And I'll say instead said, let's create a bar for a better kind of agriculture,
right.
And let them be bad,
right?
Because to be honest, to be fair, when I started in this, which was, God knows, 1978 or something, I don't know. The thought of us limiting conventional agriculture was so absurd.
Of course.
Nobody cared what we thought in the USDA at all. And I really don't think we were trying to create a price premium by creating standards. I think we were trying to figure out for ourselves, what did we mean by organic?
Right.
And I know the early days, it was like we're sitting here reading books that were 30, 40 years old, trying to go, I think it would be this. I think it would be that.
Yeah. No, so I don't think the original goal was to create a price premium, but that's the effect of the way this voluntary label played out. And I completely understand why the movement couldn't go after conventional in the same way. Like I think right now we're going to hold on in this particular political moment, which I could talk at length about. we're going to hold on to every kind of environmental regulation we can.
Yeah.
So I see that it was politically difficult, but therein lies the problem. It's like, so it gave consumers a way to opt out, did not address, of course, most consumers didn't have the capabilities of opting out. And for farmers that were already under the fold of organics, it gave them the incentive to protect that, because that's how they were staying alive financially, rather than think about how can we proliferate this.
Right.
And the conventional growers I spoke to at the time, they were like, they saw this. They said, well, we thought you all wanted us to grow organic, and we're being told you can't do it this way, you can't do it that way. So it's a conundrum.
Yeah.
And it's not to make excuses for, the industrial organic, but it is, because it's a real conundrum. It's like, how can you uphold standards that are voluntary and still spread this practice that ultimately is a goal? You would like to have as many people growing agroecologically as possible.
Yeah. It was a debate in the very beginning in the Soil Association in England, which I think were the first ones who came up with standards. And it was a debate between Lady Eve Balfour and Patrick Holden and his friends, who were called the Young Turks. And the Young Turks said, we need standards, we need to create a certification. And they did say, because we're trying to make a living and there's no way that people in the marketplace can understand what we're doing is different unless we create a standard. And I know that Lady Eve thought, I'm not sure you can define organic in that way. And so there was a lot of resistance from the older folks, admittedly, most of whom were quite wealthy independently. And so they didn't have to worry about how to sell this stuff and how to make a living. So I think that they both had really good points.
Yeah, they did.
It's that, maybe we can't reduce this into a bunch of definitions, and it's really a way of thinking, and then it's a way of behaving differently. And at the same time, if we don't create standards, this will never grow.
Yeah, no, I totally see the rationales on both sides, but here we are. What is it, like still 1% of acreage in the United States is organic?
Yes, but that's a little bit of a lie. 7% of the food is organic.
There's a lot of sales, imports.
There's a lot of imports, and also, what is this acreage in California? Is 9% is organic?
California is a huge percentage of it. A lot of the sales.
Yes, but of acreage, I think it's 9% of the acreage in California?
Probably.
13% in Vermont, by the way. We're the national leaders.
There's much more in Italy, I think. I mean, that's all great, but still, considering how much organic has grabbed the public imagination, it's still kind of disproportionately low.
Well,
and how many consumers imagine that they buy organics? The surveys always say, oh yeah, I buy organics, and they, how often do they buy? Maybe they buy organic milk, but it doesn't square with the fairly low percentage of sales and certainly low acreage at this point.
I think that the acreage, I've pondered this because I thought, how is this possible?
Right.
You got 7% of the sales and 1% of the land, the agricultural land. But when you look at
broadacre farming,
when you look at your number for California, 9%, and you look at Vermont, 13%, and the coasts are higher, and then you look at the Midwest, and it's much less than 1%, and they're growing commodity crops, which there is a market for organic commodity crops for the CAFOs, the confinements, which shouldn't be certified as organic anyway. But a lot of that's imported, 2/3 of the soy, almost half of the corn. How it is that somebody in Turkey or Africa can compete with an American farmer on corn and soy, one has to wonder if they are in fact playing by the same rules. For a berry crop, you can imagine it because of the cost of labor, which we can talk about. But for something as mechanized as grain production, it doesn't make sense, except that you think it's fraud. Okay, so this is a case, for me, I'm fascinated by the places in which we short circuit capitalism. And it's funny because as I've gone through this, I wouldn't have said I was a great champion of capitalism when I began.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm a champion now, but I see that there's a brilliance to it. If you do read Austin Frerich's book, there's a foreword by Eric Schlosser,
Yeah.
and it's all quoting Adam Smith.
Yeah.
And he's saying the absolute enemy of capitalism is monopoly.
Yeah.
And it's the job of the government to defend us from monopoly.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, well, that's interesting because our version of capitalism is all monopoly.
Yeah.
And the system unregulated becomes
Yeah.
monopolistic. It's what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think monopoly is a big problem, but I don't think it's only monopoly that's a problem for agriculture and I think capitalism. I think capitalism ultimately is a problem here. I mean, the other thing that gets not enough attention that I've written a lot about, it came up in my organic project and my strawberry project, is the role of land values.
Yeah.
Because agricultural land is based on the most you can get out of that land, and including for commercial uses. If it goes from agricultural land to suburbs, it's because that land is a scarce resource on Earth, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I found this early on when I was doing my dissertation research. Is like, how is it that this person is able to grow organically using rotations on this piece of land? Like let's say in the Napa area. It's like, oh, well, they inherited the land from a generation. Once I started thinking about the land issue and realizing that growers who were leasing and had to make payments to land could not afford to take land out of production for fallowing or for compost or for cover crops or whatever.
Yes. In California.
Where
land values are so high.
Well, absolutely.
What's an acre of lettuce or strawberry land go for these days in
Well,
California?
I think it's very hard to disaggregate because those two crops happen to be near commercial uses, because they both both lettuce and strawberries do really well on the coast.
That coastal climate.
Where everybody wants to live. And so it's really hard to separate.
Well, what's an acre of land cost there? I'm just curious if you...
I don't know these days, but my guess, I mean, the last time I looked, strawberry land was something like $4,000 a year to lease, and not necessarily with the impending real estate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Just to release it. Okay.
So I don't know in terms of I did track a few strawberry land sales, and they were going for $100,000 an acre or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was like 10 years ago.
So if you're going to make your living off that land,
you have to farm intensively.
You've got to be intensive.
And in a kind of model system, what happens is the grower figures out how to get more from that piece of land. The landowner, let's assume it's a lease arrangement, the landowner says, oh, well, then I'm going to just charge you more for that land. And so the way in which these systems get embedded into land values makes it really hard to change.
Yeah.
And some of the most successful organic growers in California that I know best are those that are kind of farming outside of the usual land markets where there's that kind of real estate pressure.
Yeah. So they're finding situations in which landowners support their mission?
Yeah, or they're growing, like for instance, Jim Cochran, who I don't know if he's still, I think they've really cut down their acreage because he lost land to a fire actually, but he's grown on conservation easement land. He's a strawberry grower,
I'm going to be interviewing him in 2 days.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. I haven't seen him in a long time.
So many stories to tell because, of course, his labor conversation is amazing, too.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to go to several things we've touched on, but first there's a big thing that I struggle with when I have listened to you, read you, and that is that you're clear about the devastation, the destruction of the industrial organic, the ways in which it's failing us. But you're not exactly celebratory of the alternative, which is the farmers markets and the CSAs, because you've call them out for being something that only people who are more affluent, I don't think you have to be real affluent to do those, but certainly you're probably not broke. You're not struggling. You're not food insecure. So I'm just curious, because it seems like if you say, well, that's fine for some people, but if we need something that's going to transform everything, then we really talking about we've got to start with the big corporations and change them. And at the same time, we're saying the big corporations literally cannot solve our problems because they're big corporations.
Right.
It leaves me with no place to go.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, look, those critiques of farmers markets and CSAs I wrote maybe 15 or 20 years ago. So, so those are pretty old critiques.
Sure.
And I do think that the alternative movement has, since I wrote those critiques, has been more aware of its race and class exclusions and has really tried to address those. But I think I'm not super critical of them. I just don't think that they're maybe enough and it's the same reason that I think like it's the same logic of like the thing about the relationship between industrial organic and agroecological organic. It's like we've got to create institutions and practices and incentives for those that move people along. So that I know it's been called like farming in the middle for farmers, but some way in which to broaden the umbrella to encourage better practices rather than only think about the way to support the most precious, perfect practices.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Great. It's a perfect transition to regenerative. And I would disagree with the description of what I do as precious. I would disagree that it's fundamentalist or narrow. I think it's the way most of the food has been grown in history. Not always well. Not always well. Some of those practices were destructive and civilizations crumbled as a result. But I think that the radicals here are the chemical agriculture. I think that this is a new idea, truly untested, and it's already showing enormous cracks. So
I have nothing to say that's good about it.
Yeah, good. So let's talk about, for a minute, regenerative and agroecological. So you use the term agroecological sometimes, and it's a beautiful world movement. I've talked to people and when they described it, I said, that sounds like real organic to me. And they say, yes, but we are adamantly political. We must be political. That is part of the movement. And I'll just say that I now know wonderful college professors who are professors of agroecology, and they're not very political. So I'm just curious. It changes. It changes as it grows.
I know several people doing research on regenerative, and I'm not really up to date with it. But as far as I can tell, that regenerative has that same sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Loose meanings that organic has. Like, it means different things for different people. It can be just like trying to do like carbon smart. I know that there's some big financiers that are really into regen, so I don't know what to make of all that. And I'm not an expert on it. I'm less concerned with the name we ascribe to these things than that we do practices that are diversified. Diversified farming is another kind of code for not industrial, but that are soil and friendly and don't use toxic inputs. So I don't care what we call it. And I think there seems to be so much kind of effort put into like defining the term and figuring out what that term is, and it's always going to be appropriated by others. So it's like, let's figure out a way to encourage good practices and not get caught up with the definitions that then lead to these efforts to protect the definition. I know this goes against what you've been doing, but you're protecting the definition rather than thinking like, how are we going to think about a politics that encourages better practices?
I think it's doomed.
Yeah.
I just say.
Yeah.
So General Mills is one of that. All of big food supports regenerative now.
Yeah. Totally.
They all say we are pledged to go regenerative, and they give a year by which, and all of that. Yeah. And it's pretty much Bubameiser, to use an old Yiddish term. Yeah. And I remember at Expo West, which is a huge trade show, natural foods trade show, and General Mills, the first year they put out a regenerative stand, and it was like a block long, just huge things. They'd always been organic. That had been what they celebrated. Yeah. Not this year. Yeah. This year it was all about regenerative. And Aaron Stevens, who is the founder of Nature's Path, was there going, and he competes with their organic brand. Yeah. And he's like, what's this? Yeah. And he went up and asked them, what does this mean? And actually the people in the stand had no idea.
Yeah, no one knows what it means.
Right? No one knows what it means. And General Mills has gone on to say, we don't really believe in a standard or a definition. Yeah. Just what you're saying. Yeah. We want to encourage farmers to do better. Yeah. And to embrace these actually organic techniques, but we're going to strip it of all that scary stuff for the Midwesterners who apparently are terrified of people like you and me. Yeah. And so they don't want to do anything that came from Berkeley or Vermont. Yeah. Okay, but I've seen it weaponized against organic.
Totally. Well, totally. I mean, all the beyond, when I was doing that research, all the beyond organic labels were weaponized against organic. I mean, I totally understand like the need, the motives behind real organic, for example. I completely understand it. And I'm really sympathetic to it. But I'm also sympathetic to like how do we move people along some sort of spectrum? And
I support the regenerative that is helping to move people along. I do. And I always have until I started to find I had a lot of darts in my back. Yeah. And I'm like, why am I being attacked by these people who are trying to move people towards a more organic kind of agriculture? Right. And I remember talking to Gabe Brown a long time ago, and I told him what we were doing. He says, I don't really care about certification. Yeah. And I thought, well, sure you don't, because you're one of the best marketers in America. You don't need any kind of labeling. You are your label. Right. Well, now he's started Regenified, which is a for-profit thing, and it's going to be big. Yeah. And it's got standards. Yeah. They have nothing to do with chemical use. Yeah. They're all about the good things they do, but not mentioning the bad things they do. I mean, herbicides impact soil too.
Right. Yeah, no, I know. I understand that to be the truth. It's like you're not tilling, so you're using herbicides. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's bad.
Yeah.
That's really bad.
Okay, so it's a wild world out there.
It's a wild world, and I know that what I think is not politically feasible at this moment. I don't know what is politically feasible at this moment, and I mean, that's a very serious question, because right now I just want to, my biggest priority across everything is to not have fascism in this country. Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, I don't even know what to think about how to make a better food system under the conditions under which we live today.
Let's talk about, you said you wanted to talk about how we change regulation or law, which is connected to this.
Yeah, I mean, well, but it's a hard go, right? But I just don't think that I think that there's only so much we can do in building alternatives without undermining the stuff we think is wrong. And building alternatives alone doesn't undermine it. We've seen that. We've seen that with organic. Yes. It coexisted side by side, and it's why the alternative protein market, which I don't think is a great thing, but it's a good analogy, it's why it's not taking off. Because why would people buy a gross, highly processed plant-based burger? I mean, the diehard vegans will, if they really want that burger, when you can get a regular burger for much, much cheaper.
Right.
So you've got to figure out a way to make that more expensive, the bad stuff, and the way you make it more expensive is to regulate it out of existence.
Okay, that's very good. Yeah. So the problem, and you see, I've always been challenged because you go, well, organic becomes the food of the elite because it costs more. Yeah. Well, it does cost more, and it shouldn't cost more because it's organic. It should cost more because of the practices.
Right.
but conventional should have the same practices.
Right. Conventional shouldn't be so cheap.
It shouldn't be so cheap.
And it's cheap because you can use whatever, and there's no kind of sense of the future. There's no kind of way in which you care about the future. It's extractive, to use a more current term than I used in the 25 years ago.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. It's extractive. Okay. So there are two perspectives, and one is I think of as Elliot Coleman, and one I think of as Al Gore.
Yeah.
And Elliot Coleman is like, screw them.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
And the people who care will find me.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
He's not exactly just a lone person off in the woods, because he was quoted in many national publications and has taught thousands of people through books. And then Al Gore, on the other hand, famous line, and lots of people hate Al Gore for reasons that are confusing, but they do. Yeah. I interviewed him once, and we got more grief about interviewing Al Gore, and I'm like, what's the big problem? Yeah. So, but his famous line is, as good as it is to change the light bulbs, it's more important to change the laws. Yeah. And so his focus has been on how do we create national change by changing the laws. Yeah. And whether it happens to be about climate or happens to be about food system, which are so intertwined, we can't separate them. Absolutely. And you would say, you would say, I love what Elliot's doing, but I think that Al has a point.
I'm very much in the Al Gore camp. I mean, that you can't. Ultimately, both happen together. You need to learn how to do the alternatives to fill in for when you undermine conventional. But you have to do that, and so how do you do that? You change the way we subsidize agriculture. We change the way we regulate environmental pesticides. I mean, those are all really politically difficult.
Yes.
And I know that, but that's ultimately what it's going to take. And there are examples where when there's been a modicum of regulation, you see changes in practices, and that goes to the strawberries. I'm on this committee that I won't tell you much about, but it's driving me insane. But my point over and over again, because we're looking at what are the barriers to moving toward alternatives to fumigants.
Yeah.
And I said the barriers are that we still are allowed to use fumigants.
Okay. So let's spend 5-10 minutes on strawberries. Yeah. So for people who don't understand what a fumigant is and why they have to use it in strawberries, could you explain that?
Yeah. So soil fumigants is one of several highly toxic inputs used in strawberry production, and fumigants they kill soil-borne pests. So mainly nematodes, little worms, and weeds to extent, but mainly they're used for soil-borne fungi that if they get into the plant can kill or weaken and kill the plant.
Okay.
And so fumigants. I mean, methyl bromide was why is it that these fungi are attacking the strawberries? I mean, was this always the case that all strawberries in the world were attacked? No, I mean because the main fungi that drove a lot of the drive to develop fumigants was Verticillium dahliae, which is everywhere. But when you grow a monocrop year after year, the fungi are going to be attracted to that.
So without any crop rotation.
But the fumigants allow them not to have crop rotation.
Okay.
So normally, I mean, strawberries are particularly interesting because you can grow strawberries organically or agroecologically, however we want to call it.
Yeah.
If they're a minor crop in a diversified system, and if you put in like a brassica before the strawberries, the brassicas have mild fumigation qualities. But strawberries are grown in monocrops in California, and fumigation allows you to grow strawberries year after year on the same block, because after you harvest strawberries, you fumigate the soil, kill all the remaining pests again, and then you plant again.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. I think that I think we eat a lot more strawberries than we used to.
Oh yeah.
Used to be the special treat.
Absolutely.
You'd have them for
Yeah.
3 weeks a year, 4 weeks a year. They were delicious.
Yeah.
Everyone was so excited when the strawberries came in.
Yeah.
Now they're in every supermarket in America
Absolutely.
every day of the year.
Absolutely.
They don't taste very good.
No.
They're big.
Yeah.
They're red, and they last forever
Yeah.
in your refrigerator. So we have shifted our eating habits based on the omnipresence of these strawberries.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because strawberries, like many other crops, have had, systematic overproduction. They come up with new techniques to create more yield, then they have to find the markets. And so when they started fumigating in the 1960s, but then, then they started having, once they can fumigate, they can create, then they created varietals that were produce more, et cetera, that are tasteless, last long, all the things that you just described are from varietal development. But they always had gluts. And so then they started selling strawberry. One of the things that the California Strawberry Commission did was create more marketing around strawberries, calling it a superfood. And, I've talked to a lot of people say this is the only thing my kid will eat. I mean, and, they live in New York or whatever. That's the only thing my kid will eat. I need those strawberries. And I get it. But it's been heavily marketed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, the strawberry growers are like, well, people want this, but they produce that market.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because in the production of the berries for that market, it's not so good the way they're produced. I mean, there are real problems.
They're the real problems. I mean, strawberries are the most intense pesticide regime of any crop in California, and that's saying a lot.
Yeah.
It's not only the fumigation, but it's also antifungals basic pesticides. It's nasty.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got these very expensive strawberries. They come from around the world.
Yeah.
So it's not just California because they want to have. Of course, they have pretty.
California grows 90% in the country, and I think exports. Is it that 30% are exported, or that? Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
90% in the country.
90% of America's strawberries that are produced here are produced in California.
Yeah.
Because of the climate.
Yeah, because you can grow 9 months a year in California, sometimes 10. And the coastal climate where most strawberries are grown on the coast, and they call it eternal spring.
Yeah.
Because it's never super hot, and so you can grow strawberries all through the summer and into the fall.
Yeah.
Certain years I've seen strawberries, locally grown strawberries at the farmers market into December. Yes.
I've noticed I don't see those locally grown strawberries in the supermarkets.
No, they're mainly Driscoll's and Giant. I buy all my strawberries from the farmers market. So yeah.
I'm noticing that even though it appears that we have more choices all the time, I think we have less choices. And there's food that those choices exist if you go to the farmers market. But a lot of things that there was this little golden age. I would have said it was about 10 years ago. Where the supermarkets were buying locally.
Yeah, I mean, that's how like the Whole Foods and the supernatural supermarkets were kind of marketing.
Not just them.
Whole Foods is horrible.
I sold to Hannaford's and Stop and Shop and Shaw's in the Northeast, and they all had local programs. And they were actually, I mean, we had Cruz coming out with film cameras and Cruz, and there was a change going on. And I'm like, this is fantastic. This is actually working. And that's all gone now.
Yeah, no, I hadn't really thought about it, but you're absolutely right. That was a big thing where they'd always show the photos of the farmer on the wall. Yeah, no, you're right. That's really disappeared. You're right.
Yeah. And one of the things is that all the chains I just mentioned were all bought up by other multinationals.
Well, yeah, like Amazon.
Amazon, Ahold, USA,
Yeah.
obviously Albertsons and
Another
Kroger's.
problem with consolidation.
Another problem with consolidation.
Yeah.
And it has a real impact
Yeah.
on what food is available to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as an avid farmer's market grower, despite all my critiques,
Yes.
we buy probably 80 or 90% of our produce at the farmer's market. I think bananas would be the exception.
Yeah.
The occasional mango. It's like you have choices, and I have more choices in California than you
Yes,
do
you
in
do.
Vermont.
We're very good in the summer,
Yeah.
but the summer is not long.
I can do it year round.
know,
I can
it's
do it year
beautiful.
round, but I'm only buying, like every time I see a New York Times recipe with tomatoes in April, I'm like, what? What are you talking about? You can't do that. So
Good. Okay.
it does get the seasonal stuff. I do it all the time, but it sometimes you go, God, it would be nice to have a tomato in this dish.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what I do is I grow tomatoes out of season in the
Yeah.
greenhouse.
Yeah.
But let me.
Have you heard of the California dry farm tomatoes?
Yeah.
They're exceptional.
Yeah. I've heard that they're exceptional.
They're amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. We don't have a dry season.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not a thing.
Yeah.
I have tortured plants near to death, and they were very good.
Yeah.
Right here, all you have to do is not irrigate, and you're torturing them.
Yeah.
But they're very good.
They're
They're
really good.
really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So before we go, let's check in on our dear friends in big tech
Uh-huh.
and their belief that they have solutions to all our problems in
Yeah.
agriculture.
Yeah.
For me, the most poignant example is the company Plenty.
Yeah, that's already out of business.
Yeah, which was started by Elon's brother, Kimball,
Yeah.
and had investment from Bezos and others. And
that was Square Roots was started by one of his brothers.
I know Kimball did Plenty,
Okay.
and he might have done Square Roots, or maybe it evolved into it. But it's an aeroponic company.
Yeah.
And so they grow this wall of greens, and on the
Yeah.
other side the roots are hanging, and they missed it.
Yeah.
So it's the most extreme version of hydroponic.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is it never worked financially.
No, it absolutely didn't. That's why they all went out of business. Because the thing with the tech is the techies getting into food and agriculture is they haven't defined the problem very well. So it's not clear what problem they're trying to solve with hydroponics. I mean, it's a presumption, I think, is that there's a shortage of land. Land scarcity and land shortage is not exactly the same, but that there's a shortage of land, and so growing indoors will be more resource wise. But it takes tons of resources to grow hydroponically.
Yeah.
Or the fake meats that they want to grow in bioreactors. They act as if that's won't exist in space somewhere, and it won't take all the energy needs and the metal for bioreactors and some of the hydroponic operations use all sorts of styrofoam and plastics, and so it's like many things tech. They're just kind of try to mystify how this stuff is grown, but it's very resource intensive. But it's not clear what problem they're trying to solve.
Yes. I think of the aeroponics as a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah,
actually,
I agree with that.
They only flourish as long as new investors come in and buy out the old investors.
Absolutely, but it's already fallen apart.
It's falling apart.
Yeah,
So
I started doing this research on the tech sector and food and agriculture. When did we start? Oh gosh, maybe 2017. I'm not remembering exactly right now. But it was a time when the sector was just getting going, and I actually just fell upon it toward the end of my strawberry project, and in part because the strawberries, some people were talking about growing strawberries in substrate to avoid putting it in soil, and also because of the labor shortages. They were talking about robotic strawberry harvesters. They still are. And so that kind of got me into it, but I was just deeply curious about how Silicon Valley thought they could fix things that no one else, they imagined no one else could. And so it was just starting to blossom, and there's events all the time and all this money pouring into it. And now it's just like, it's just like the latest. It's, that's how the tech industry works.
They're very good at marketing.
They're very good at marketing. They're very good at the hype.
Yeah, they are.
But the vertical farms are totally gone belly up. The plant-based meats aren't doing that well, and most of the rest of what they are offering is like digital agriculture, robotics, and or digital information system where they're just sucking up farmers' data and giving it back to farmers. So that's probably going to persist, but it's still not clear what problems it solves.
Right.
Like, what do the farmers need the data for if they can go and walk their fields? Well, if they're big enough, they maybe need the data.
Right, because they can't walk their fields.
Because they can't walk their fields. But it's really not clear what kind of problems it's solving. So I think that's the main thing with that. I mean, it's also a mismatch of what Silicon Valley can offer and what the needs are. Because, agriculture and food, as we know, are fundamentally biological and biophysical, include the soil, and they're offering a bunch of digital solutions. It's like, well, what farmers, at best they need better treatments to substitute for toxic chemicals. If you want to get rid of toxicity in agriculture, okay, come up with a biological product. I'm not saying that's the best way, but they could be going that direction, right?
Right.
But they don't. It's just digital.
I do think that one of the things that sort of defines organic agriculture is that it's information intensive.
Yeah.
And there's not so much in real organic, it's not so much you're buying inputs.
Yeah.
It's that you're understanding how to work with biology.
Totally. Yeah.
And so from that perspective, I think that the information revolution has a lot to offer.
Yeah.
But in terms of turning it into an app, maybe that will come, but I don't think that that's the point. I think that the point is it's pretty helpful to go to YouTube and be able to draw from 1,000 or 100,000 farmers,
right,
and see what their solutions are.
Yeah, sure. So you could have AI combing through farmer solutions.
Yeah, it's going to change everything, and some of it's going to be good and some of it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
So, okay. You've written a whole book about the fact that big tech is trying to solve problems that aren't problems, that they don't understand because they're just understanding it from their perspective.
Yeah.
It's not that their tools are necessarily useless, it's that their application of their tools often is useless.
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies. I think sometimes, a lot of times, a lot of what's coming out of Silicon Valley is applications or tools that have been used in other arenas that they're looking for new markets for.
Yeah.
So even like the cellular meat came from medical uses when they were regenerating organs. They go, oh, what can we? Oh, we can make meat from cells.
Yeah.
And I think that was true for the digital things too. It's like, well, we've saturated this market. Let's find a new place to put it.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. I think that I call that solutionism in the book.
Yeah.
But I think there's a big part of the techno fix too. Is like here's these worldly problems of climate change and food insecurity and environmental toxicity or whatever, and how can we fix this? And if you come with a very narrow set of tools. I mean, a lot of those are what we've been talking about. There's social problems, there are political problems that need political action.
Yes.
And a techno fix that's just going to try to solve it with technology is not going to address these fundamental problems.
Okay, so we have to go to the Green Revolution for a minute.
Yeah.
I think that was the first, one of the first examples.
Prime example
of this.
Yeah.
We know better.
Yeah.
We have figured out a lot of stuff, and let's go and now we will save the people of Mexico and we'll save the people of India, and now Bill Gates is trying to save the people of Africa.
Right, because they didn't want to address land reform, right? Because they said, oh, we know that there's a problem of hunger in the former colonies, And the Green Revolution, it was, it came at a time where there was red revolutions all over the place, and so it was really like, driven by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation. They didn't want to. They wanted to keep the world capitalist friendly, and they wanted to suppress any kind of socialist revolution or any even land reform. And so the Green Revolution was an alternative to this kind of a social solution, which is to rethink the distribution of land. So let's just develop high-yielding varieties and feed the world that way.
Well, for high-yielding varieties
With
and
a package of
irrigation
chemicals.
system, the whole package,
package
the
of chemicals and irrigation,
the mechanization.
Yeah,
And what's fascinating is that not only did it ignore land reform, it made it much worse.
Absolutely, because it created all sorts of consolidation of farmers. And a lot of farmers became landless as they lost their land if they couldn't afford the packages.
Thank you. That's a very clear explanation.
Yeah.
You know, when I started, I was like, like everyone. I thought, well, Green Revolution, that was good, right?
Yeah.
It saved millions of people, right?
Yeah.
And as I dive in and I start talking to people,
Yeah.
Hans Herren is fantastic on this. It's like, no,
Yeah.
it's not what happened. So,
Yeah.
so what did happen is like we were trying to replicate Iowa in Mexico.
Right.
And to the degree that we succeeded, now they have the same problems that Iowa has.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I have a friend, Annalise Orlick, who is an academic at Dartmouth, and she's a labor historian. Yeah. And so she's an expert on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. So I'm an expert on it too. She spoke at the 100th anniversary a few years ago. Yeah. And she taught me the impact of that. It was a fire, a lot of people died, and people were locked in to whatever, a 5th floor, 6th floor, and in the garment district there, and they had no choice but to jump out the window, or they stayed in and died. If they jumped out, they died. They all died. And it was, you know, whatever, 1920 or something like that. And the bodies are lined up, the burned bodies are lined up on the street. And this is in the Lower East Side, but it's not that far from, you know, Manhattan, in Manhattan, not that far from Wall Street. Yeah. And they're taking pictures, and people are coming by, and Francis Perkins is there, who went on to become the Secretary of Labor under Roosevelt. Yeah. And it was a turning point in the American labor movement. Yeah. And it was a turning point because people saw the terrible outcome of bad laws, of bad regulations, that these people were not protected. Yeah. And they saw their bodies and they saw this is not okay, and we won't put up with it. And so the laws changed and OSHA was created, and a lot of things happened as a result of that fire. Yeah. And what's really grim is at the 100th anniversary, there was a woman, Kalpuna Akhter, who came from Bangladesh, and same thing is happening there now. Weekly fires, people dying, no labor laws, people working incredible hours for very, very little pay, but they have no choice. And we get really cheap clothes. So cheap, they're throwaway. You want a free t-shirt? You want a free sweatshirt? You know, I got too many. So the reason this happens is because we don't see the fire. It happened far away, someplace else. And I think that this is true of lots of things. Certainly it's true with labor in agriculture. Right. Most of the labor in agriculture in the US happens in California. Yeah. And now, 40% of the vegetables come from Mexico or elsewhere, 60% of the berries? Yeah. We don't see that at all. Yeah. What, at this point right now, do you know what an American worker, probably undocumented, is being paid in the strawberry fields?
Well, they have to make minimum wage.
Which is, in California, it's high.
Yeah, it's over 15 at this point.
Yeah.
But the way they do that is with piece rates. Uh-huh. And so almost all strawberries are picked with piece rates entirely or a combination of piece and wage rates. And so what happens there, and so the way you make piece rates to make the minimum wage is you have, if you're the worker, you have to be running the entire time.
Yeah.
And so the people who work in strawberries and survive it are young men who can run through the fields because they're picking, and then they're putting them in boxes and running. We're good.
Yeah.
They're running back to the truck to measure them, and so so they make over minimum wage, and the growers love to talk about how the workers are so happy because they're making more than minimum wages, and they're not having to work all day long because they're working so fast.
Yes.
But it's under horrific conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're really working hard.
Yeah, we're talking about like 9 crates. Like a crate of has like 12 baskets.
Yes.
In an hour.
Right.
Kind of minimum.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So and having done some of that kind of work, I have nothing but respect for the people who are doing that.
Yeah.
But now let's go down to Mexico.
Yeah.
And what are they getting paid for doing the same work?
I don't know, but it would be much, much lower. Probably at least no more than 10% of that is what my guess would be, but I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Last I heard it was under $2 an hour, more like $1.
Right.
So, and I'm sure they're hustling too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now we have a situation, 2 things. One is people going, isn't it wonderful that I can get berries every day for my breakfast?
Yeah.
And they don't think that somebody who picked them is getting paid $10 a day.
Yeah.
And that's because it's far, far away. If it was in their town, they would be pretty uncomfortable with that, I think.
Right. We would hope.
Well, I think a lot of people would.
Yeah.
That's
well,
the
just
point.
like the deportations we're seeing, when people see them close up, they're pretty offended by them.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we're getting that in Vermont as well.
Yeah. When they know them, I didn't. My neighbor.
Yeah, they know them.
Yeah.
And there's some brilliant guy who's out giving talks and everyone loves and respects.
Yeah.
And they're being arrested by ICE. And I go, wait, this can't be.
Yeah.
So do you think as you've studied labor and agriculture, what's your hope? What's your best hope?
My best hope, I mean, to your point, I think that consumers will get offended. I mean, the consumers supported the United Farm Workers in the 60s in their efforts. But I think the best hope is a strong labor movement. And we're seeing some resurgence of that right now. We have in the last few years. So, I mean, I think I don't know any other way to do it. I don't think labels, for example, and I'm not the first person to say this, but a label that's saying we pay our workers better, or we have better working conditions is going to cut it unless the workers are involved in that.
Yeah.
And you have the union label to do that, right? So, I mean, it can't be growers saying to the public, I'm a better employer. It has to be workers.
Yes.
Organizing amongst themselves and getting what they need from their employers.
Well, the challenge is that whatever label, let's say you have a label that's good.
Yeah. And
fair trade was good, but then they've got Fair Trade USA, which looks the same.
It undercuts it, yeah.
And it's entirely created by the farm owners, and it's not as good. Yeah. I won't say that it's all bullshit, but I will say that it's not as good and not nearly as good. Yeah. So that's the problem with whatever label, whether it's created by the workers or not. One of the things I've seen is we can't outrun the corporations. They're better at this than we are. Yeah. They've got huge microphones. They've got large staffs of professionals who are better at messaging than we are. Yeah. And we're going to have to stand and fight. And I'm going to interview Paul Hawken this afternoon. He's going to say, no, Dave, you're misunderstanding it. Fighting isn't the answer. But I respect, I'll be there to listen. Because explain to me, Paul, because I don't know how else to do this.
Yeah,
But,
no, this time, at this day and age,
yeah,
that's all we can do. And complicity isn't working.
right.
It's just so not working. I think it's so evident right now. You have to fight back.
So let me ask you my next to last question. You've written about Amartya Sen.
Amartya Sen, yeah.
Yeah, a Nobel-winning economist who
Yeah.
taught about the failure of distribution in causing hunger. I think these were very similar ideas to Francis Moore-Lappé,
Yeah.
who wrote,
Yeah.
hunger is not caused by a shortage of food,
Right.
but by a shortage of democracy.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Amartya Sen was one of the first thinkers, scholars, to make the point that producing more food was not going to solve the problem of hunger. And he based it on his observations of famines in the mid part of the 20th century. And most famines that were, almost all famines were not a problem of underproduction of food, but some sort of political machinations that kept food from certain people, or just problems of distribution. And so he was really fighting this kind of Malthusian idea that the way to solve hunger is to produce more food. And he wrote this before Lappé did, and I think it's so important. And it surprises me that more people are not aware of his work and his thinking on this.
Doesn't surprise me. But
yeah.
one of the things that I've learned is that most people haven't heard of anybody.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And
Yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of people who are famous to me.
Yeah.
But when I talk to other
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
my
yeah.
friends, educated people,
Yeah.
they've never heard of them.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's the nature of the information age, which we are in.
Yeah,
And there's so many voices.
But I just, again, I do a lot of different, not too much, but the work I've done with agricultural scientists who really believe that the best thing they could be doing is supporting farmers and producing more. And I keep on bringing up these ideas, and they think like I'm a nut. And it's like, but these ideas have been circulating for a long time.
Yeah.
And the whole kind of food security notion, came from his work.
Yeah.
That access is more important than the production. I mean, that all the ideas people talk about, we need food access, that all stems from Amartya Sen's work from at least 50 years ago.
Yes. So, and I would say that we don't need to have heard of Sen. We need to hear you say this.
Right.
Right? We pass it on. We pass the torch on.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like we forget who said it first, and probably he didn't say it first either.
Yeah.
But he probably said it very well. So can you describe for me your idea of a green revolution?
Well, that term.
I understand.
That term is
Let's reclaim it. Let's reclaim it. Like, what
you mean a
is
green revolution as opposed to industrial green revolution?
Yes, I do.
I mean, I don't think I have a lot more to say than I've already said. I think that we need to, first and foremost, we need to take control of our political system and democratize it. And then we need to have policies that encourage practices that are more ecological. I know there are many in the food movement that are more kind of anarchists, I suppose. The Joel Saltons, I don't think he would call himself an anarchist. He's a libertarian, but see themselves as like, we just need to do this without government, and that we can just grow. We can just grow a movement and grow institutions that are different, but I just don't think that's plausible. And I point to the current moment and see that we have an administration that's trying to create that kind of anarchy, that's trying to derail all of our institutions, and I don't see that out of that emerging like this something else. I see something really nasty emerging out of that. So I think we have to democratize our democracy.
Yeah. Okay. I thought I was done, but I do have one.
Oh, no.
This one's complicated.
Oh no.
Well,
I might be running out of steam.
I know. We'll. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Forgive me. I know we've gone an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
This is a confusing time.
Yeah.
And for me, it's confusing because for the first time in my life, I'm seeing quite conservative politicians embracing the ideas that I believe in.
Yeah. Oh, you mean RFK?
RFK, but not just RFK.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing it in some of the quite conservative politicians. It's the first time that I've heard both sides of the aisle, not everybody on both sides by a long shot, but some voices on both sides talking about the need for whole food, healthy food, and we can put aside a lot of things that I don't agree with, but there's a lot I do agree with.
Well, right. And I think that's one of the things is the food movement has never been a strong left-right issue. I think like the Trumpites try to spin it that way sometimes, although then he takes on RFK, which is just kind of mind-boggling, really. But it's never been a left-right movement. And I think some of the tensions within the food movement have been because the left and the right are in it together.
Yeah.
So I don't think it works to think about it that way.
Okay.
Because there is this really strong libertarian right wing, I would say even Christian nationalist piece of it, and then I think the left has embraced food as a way to kind of champion some sort of democratic socialist agenda, and I think everybody's kind of embraced food in their own ways.
Yes.
So I think that I don't think it's a simple solution, and that's why an RFK is confusing for more than that. I mean, RFK is confusing because somebody go, well, I agree that we shouldn't have food additives, and I agree this is toxic, and we have no idea why the McDonald eating orange guy wants him, other than just to destroy. But the anti-vax stuff is absurd.
Yes.
And what the measles outbreak and the way he deploys science, like go look up your own science. It's like, well, that's what we have experts for, is to weed through science. And so what does he even say? You can find your own science. It's like, well, go on the web and look at any crackpot. I mean, it's really complicated, but it is a complicated thing, because on the other hand, the alternative food movement, I mean, has been a kind of homegrown, like we have our own information sources and we create new ideas. So it's really hard.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see the pushback against him as being like looking to scientific expertise, when we know that scientific expertise in food and agriculture has been not always on our side in terms of what they're promoting. But you don't want to say it's a free-for-all. So it's a really complicated time to think about the role of science itself in determining what is good food or good agricultural practice.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by what's going on. And it's happening so quickly.
Yeah.
Who knows where things are going to go.
Yeah.
So Julie,
Yeah.
We've had a long conversation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you
it's really
staying
fun.
with me.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to say on the way out?
No, I think I'm good. I said a lot. That was very fun, very wide-ranging. Thank you for having me on the program.
This is great.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.